So, very good morning. Welcome to the Indian ESG Network Talking Series. We share various perspectives of people through this series who are working in ESG or who are working in the sustainable practices. So, today we have with us Mr. Raghav. He's from Puducherry and he's working with the Auroville Consulting. And he's leading the team to build sustainable practices, not just in private sector, but in public sector as well. He's a graduate, he's a engineer, industrial engineer from Bangalore by background, and he was also a director with the MSME group in Pondicherry. So welcome Raghav, and we would love to hear about Auroville. As we are approaching a very interesting event on December 8th and 9th, we are conducting in Auroville, sharing various practices. I think today hearing you, it will help a lot of people to get those perspectives and understand why those sessions and those site visits will be very important to practice or to even implement sustainable practices in the organizations. So welcome to the Indian ESG Network Talking Series, and we would love to hear you.
Thank you so much, Punita. Thanks for the introduction. And of course, it's been a pleasure working with the Indian ESG Network and looking forward to sharing my personal perspectives and general perspective on Auroville, as well as Auroville Consulting. Also looking forward to the workshop. I think it's going to be a great 2-day activity, and I think there's going to be a lot of sharing and a lot of learning. So looking forward to that as well. Thank you so much.
Great. So let's begin by first introducing Auroville. What exactly is Auroville? Because a lot of people haven't visited the place. So would you like to share what exactly is Auroville and what you do in Auroville?
Absolutely. Starting from a general historical stance, so Auroville was formed in 1968. Of course, it was in the works much before that, from the 1930s. The idea was originated as an experimental township, with the backing being to experiment in an alternative form of living. So this was initially developed under a charter called the Auroville Foundation Charter. This is part of the Indian Constitution now. So Auroville is formed under the Ministry of Education and is endorsed by UNESCO. So it was these two driving forces that set up the structure and legal backing for Auroville. But I think that's the formalities. Auroville community is a very beautiful and magical place. I've lived here for about 5 years now, and I can't imagine a different life. It is a different life, in fact. So being born and brought up in the city in Bangalore, I feel the kind of lifestyle that we were leading, I felt that I needed a change, and that's what brought me in search of change. I landed in Auroville. So it is alternative in its approach. From every single person who lives here having an alternative approach to how they do activities on a daily basis, to the structure of the community. So from the Auroville Foundation and the political and legal structure of Auroville, to the way that the organizations work and their approach to work, is all very alternative in the approach. People try to do things differently here. So going a little bit into that, so Auroville as a community, if you look at it from a bird's eye view, has a set of different land allocation in terms of activities. So we have an industrial zone, an international zone, a residential zone, and a cultural zone. So each one of these zones have been set up with a lot of clear intention of what are the activities that are going to take place there. And of course, each one has a set of unique organizations doing unique work there. All of this is also surrounded by something called a green belt. So the idea was that 2/3 of the land of Auroville will be dedicated to green cover. So the 4 zones that I had mentioned is just 1/3 of the community, and the remaining 2/3 is what we can call forest. It's been afforested over the last 50 years by different groups that work on forestry specifically. These are some spaces that we'll see during the workshop as well. There are about 72 forest stewards who each have a different approach to forestry. So that's one aspect. In the residential zone as well, we have a lot of very innovative architecture that is something Auroville is very well known for. There's a lot of very established architects in the space of sustainable architecture who are based in Auroville. So the residential zone in itself is an experience to live in Auroville, to stay in places that have been constructed in a very alternative form, to support a very alternative lifestyle as well. So bringing us to Auroville's living, which is a form of community living, and it's what Auroville promotes. So in most settings, you'll be living in a community where there are a lot of shared activities, shared assets between the community, and people live close with each other with open communication to try and reduce our footprint and our impact on the environment. So this is, I think I went on a little bit of a tangent, but I think I covered most of the points that I wanted to.
Great. So if we were to, because you've also worked in the ESG space, you've been supporting various organizations. If we were to connect how ESG is already being practiced in Auroville, what would you share in terms of environment, social and governance, which is already being practiced in various ways, as you just shared?
So actually, Auroville is a great example for each from E, S, and G. So starting from the environment. So firstly, I would say it was never a prerequisite to to Auroville forming. Auroville was formed more to support alternate form of conscious lifestyle and to get people together to live in community. And in that, sustainability was a clear consequence. It was not possible for this form of alternate lifestyle to exist without caring about the environment, caring about people, and having a innovative and inclusive governance structure. So even though they didn't look at it from an ESG perspective when it was being formed, it very clearly targeted all of these areas. And now from our organization side, looking at Auroville and trying to see what it reflects in terms of ESG, it actually is giving a very interesting outcome, and it is a very good case study in that to showcase how alternatively there can be approaches to look at environmental, social, and governance. So in terms of activities, particularly in E, the major activity is decarbonization. Of course, along with waste and water, I think these are three. So firstly, talking about decarbonization. So we did a study in 2018 and 19, the emissions of the community. So of course, Auroville being a town that's developing and has certain developmental objectives, has a slightly higher footprint than the villages around. But in that, we take up certain activities like forestry, water regeneration, soil regeneration, and we did another study comparing the emissions of Auroville to the sequestration through these activities. We found out that the community is about 86% there. So there's about 14% left to achieve carbon neutrality. And of course, we have suggested from an energy, water, forestry perspective what it would mean. And this is something that the Auroville Foundation is going to take up in the upcoming future. Secondly, if we're talking about energy, Auroville has a very interesting integrated energy system. It's called similar to a microgrid, if anyone is aware. So we call it the smart mini grid within Auroville, and it's an integrated system that links all the renewable energy within Auroville so that the community consumes its electricity within itself, and we can avoid unnecessarily transmission of electricity over long distances. The smart mini grid is actually one of the site visits, one of the places that we're going to explore during the workshop. It has been set up over multiple years of research and funding and implementation. So that's a very interesting space to explored. Second is waste. So Auroville has a centralized waste processing unit called EcoService. It's also one of the places that we'll be visiting during the workshop. And they have been over the years pioneering recycling and segregation. They segregate their waste into 70, in their plastic itself into 72 different types. So there's a lot of innovative thought leadership in the waste space itself. And this carries on throughout the whole community. Of course, there'll be more details during the workshop. And water as well. I think that is the base of what Auroville is. The first set of activities that happened in Auroville were in terms of water. Auroville, as a bioregion during the early 50s, was completely barren land. It was dry, red, hard soil. All the rainwater, every single drop that fell on the land would collect into these channels and go straight into the ocean. Not a drop of water would stay on the land, and hence nothing would grow. So that was the first activity that the community addressed. They set up very innovative practices to keep the water on the land and support absorption of water into the underground reservoirs. So these are some practices that you see till date. There are huge systems of connected lakes and bunds that store the water and support it to percolate into the soil. And of course, over time, with the greenery and other practices that have come in, the land is now able to absorb the water itself also. And none of these channels that lead to the ocean that still exist today take the water and go. So, general background on ES.
Yeah, so I think it is. I mean, when you mentioned a lot of inhabitants in Auroville, so there must have been experts who've been working on these projects.
Yes,
And what I've read is that there are people from various nations who've been there and are still living there. So, would you shed some light on the social side also? Because there are many communities also doing social activities there. So,
absolutely. So social and governance. Of course, I'm from the environmental space, so I tend to
right.
get carried away and talk about the environment. But social and governance, absolutely. One, from a general day-to-day basis, the approach to living in a community and community life in Auroville, this brings people much closer together. But in a more structured approach, we're talking about, we have people from about 68 different countries living in Auroville, who came from their countries at different points, different generations ago, to form what Auroville is today, to share their perspective on what it would mean to form such a township. So, bringing all these different perspectives and views from different parts of the world together is what makes Auroville's culture unique.
Because I feel that diversity and inclusion, if somebody really needs to see Auroville is the place, because how diverse the group is and how inclusive yet it is in its approach over the years. It is itself a case study, another one, which one can learn from. So in terms of Auroville Consulting, how is that connected to the whole Auroville Foundation, or in sense, what activities does the consulting space do?
Absolutely. So I've been with consulting for about 5 years now, and the organization is about 15 years old. So Auroville Consulting is a unit under the Auroville Foundation. So we are one of the commercial units in Auroville. So, and our objective is sustainable development. So from the learnings of Auroville and its approach, we want to show that there is an alternative approach to development and showcase the expertise that the community has gathered over so many years and support it in developing other activities outside. So the idea being that we want to take the intelligence that was developed in Auroville and showcase it to the outside world. And vice versa. We also support with a lot of experimentation. So Auroville being the community that it is, it being small in scale, supports a lot of experimentation in a community scale. So from energy, waste, water, there's something that needs to be experimented, especially from a policy angle. It can be first tested in Auroville and seen what, and the research can be used to develop it on a larger scale. We do a lot of these activities with the Tamil Nadu government, with international funding agencies, development agencies, to showcase that these activities can be taken up in a larger scale within India.
So if we look at, I think if we look at the ESG space today, a lot of corporates where they're struggling is where to begin and what kind of sustainable solutions do we put in place. So it is because the whole ecosystem is changing and it requires a total, diversion or a mind shift, I would say, to start living sustainably. These are just words, and gradually we are trying to absorb, okay, what's the meaning behind the word and how to live sustainably. I feel Auroville has already been doing this over the last 40, 50 years, and a lot of cost effective and efficient solutions are there, which people can replicate and take back home in terms of corporations or social enterprises or even as individuals. So I think it's a great place to go and tried and tested methodologies instead of, really beginning from scratch.
Yeah.
So I'm sure these sessions are going to really help organizations learn these in a more deeper level.
Yes, absolutely.
So in terms of green practices, I believe there's some Auroville green practices as well. So that is again into more sustainable solutions, or what is that organization?
So, Auroville Consulting, we take up predominantly 3 sets of activities. The major work that we've been working on over the past 15 years is in the energy space, with a keen focus on renewable energy and supporting the transition to more clean forms of energy, with again within that a focus on policy especially. The second one being the team that I lead, we focus on ESG, and with under that a keen focus on decarbonization and decarbonization strategy along with technical solutions. And the third one being the Auroville Green Practices. So the Auroville Green Practices has a keen focus on capacity building, where they want to create awareness through workshops, through activities that bring and showcase the expertise and experience of members of Auroville. So that's the main idea behind the Auroville Green Practices. So over the years, they have taken workshops, online activities also, with groups that are from children all the way to very high government officials, IAS officers as well. So the focus being that sustainability, as you mentioned very rightly, Punita, is an evolving field and a new field, especially in a more formalized way. So to how can an organization from outside Auroville take these activities that Auroville has developed organically over time in a formalized way and replicate it within their own organization or within their community? And that's the whole idea behind Auroville Green Practices. And also the idea behind what we're trying to showcase in the workshop that we're doing, where an organization can come and in a more formalized way understand what the practices that have been done in all the spaces, ES and G, and see how it can be replicated within their own organization and of course personally within their own communities as well.
Great. So you've also been working with corporates before. You've worked with the MSME group, and I think that's one group which is maybe the scope 3, which gradually will start coming in, the MSMEs, the small enterprises. So what is in terms of readiness, where do you see, because it's a huge shift for corporates and MSMEs also in terms of cost, budgets, everything. So what is your view in terms of how the MSME should approach on ESG readiness, and what kind of shift should they start now so that maybe in 2-3 years they can be ready for it?
Absolutely. That's a great question. Thank you, Punita. So this is from a decarbonization, from an ESG perspective, this is actually our core area. We try and focus on organizations that are part of larger supply chains. The objective being that the transition of emissions is not, although from a governance perspective within the larger organizations, from an implementation perspective, it is mostly within their supply chains. So although larger organizations have set targets and are more focused in moving towards achieving them, without their supply chains being involved, without all the organizations that they work with being involved, it would not be possible for them to achieve any of their targets. So we've been seeing a clear transition from a marketing perspective, from investor perspective, from a supply chain perspective, and from a regulatory perspective, uh, towards more sustainable management development. So we find that these four are the main reasons for a transition. So there are a lot of regulations coming in right now, from the carbon border adjustment for exporters to national targets set by organizations that are based outside of India. So although India has set a target for 2070, an organization based in EU that has suppliers from India will still have to meet the 2050 targets, because targets are for the organization headquartered in the EU. So a lot of these regulations are putting pressure on Indian MSMEs, especially export-oriented and supply chain-related organizations, to decarbonize their activities and focus on ESG holistically. So mostly when you see vendor registration processes, things like these that are more formal, they have been evolving over time. And if you look at the activities that MSMEs need to submit to be part of larger vendor portals, they will involve E, S, and G criteria. So although it's not formalized in an ESG report that they need to submit like the larger organizations, the same studies that go into these are being needed to perform by these organizations. So saying eventually they will need to submit a consolidated report, but the activities that are required to be studied under ESG will need to be submitted in the near future anyway. So starting from their wastewater consumption, their emissions and their emission targets, their social, their environmental health and safety, social inclusivity, and then setting up a structure for their governance. So all these activities will need to be reported extremely soon. Especially in the last 1 year, we've been seeing major developments in the space. So it'll be good for organizations, especially MSMEs, from a managerial level to understand what these activities are, so they can, from their own organizational cultural perspective, understand how to move forward.
True. So, in terms of the ESG workshop that we are planning for 8th and 9th, what do you think would be the key takeaways for corporates or for companies which, can help them develop more sustainable practices? So, though you've covered during the session today, but maybe just in crisp 2-3 lines, for individuals, social enterprises, corporates, MSMEs, what is it that they'll take away will be?
Absolutely. So yes, I think I covered from an Auroville perspective what you could take away, but going more specifically into the sessions and the activities. So there are two sessions that will be taken by Auroville Consulting. One on the ESG landscape and the regulations in the ESG space, and one on decarbonization, offsetting, and the ethics behind this. So from a planning perspective, for an organization, for the management to understand how where to start, I think this is the first step. To start from a larger level, understand the organization, its operations, understand the landscape that the organization is placed in, which section of the market, what regulations they're facing, what's the future that's coming up that they need to prepare for in terms of risks. So this is where an organization will ideally start. So I feel these two sessions will give them a very crisp understanding on these fronts. So that's one. And then going into particular activities. So if they are looking to offset, for example, they're going to visit multiple forestry activities. One special one being the botanical gardens, space very close to my heart also. I really love the botanical gardens. They're doing amazing work. They have been for a very long time They're doing large scale afforestation and ecological restoration. I think that's their main approach. It's not afforestation. Paul will clarify this, but it's ecological restoration, and that's their hope, that we can restore ecologies to what they were. And that's what they're trying to showcase. And it's a very beautiful place in itself, because there's been so much experimentation over so many years, and to showcase that it's possible to reconvert land into forest, and to what it used to be. So this is one approach that I think organizations can take back, so they can implement in terms of offsetting, either inside their campuses and outside. And this is going to become something very imperative. There are regulations coming in, especially for industrial estates, for individual industries, that they have to have a certain percentage of green cover within the campus. So even in Chennai, for example, any industrial campus has to have 30% of the land allocated to forestry and green cover. This is something I think there is a huge takeaway for organizations from Auroville. One. Secondly, and I think this is a very important subject, waste. So the visit to EcoService is going to showcase organizations, along with material that they can take back, how effective waste segregation and management is done. So from procedures and practices that they can implement, to physical activities that they can get to be done within their organization, how to deal with the waste that is being generated, and how to reduce the waste that is generated in the first place. I think that will be a great session. And of course, as I'd spoken about before, the smart mini grid. In terms of environmental impact today, majority is from the energy sector. It's it's about 65% of all emissions and all impact is from energy. So energy being a key focus area, and the lowest hanging fruit within that being converting to renewable energy, right? So the smart mini grid showcases two things. One is energy efficiency, and how organizations need to first focus on making their processes efficient and their equipment efficient, and then transitioning to the cleaner sources of energy. So renewable energy, rooftop solar, wind. So this is, I think, a session that can really, a visit and a session that can really showcase how the energy transition to a better source can be taken place. Within energy, of course, we have transport as well. So this is also a key focus. We do have e-mobility, a centralized e-mobility in Auroville. So how organizations can support the transition within their organization to more electric sources of mobility, and have that come from a renewable source. And I think that is a clear takeaway that organizations can have. And the last one being land use. So construction, we have a huge amount of construction happening today, and the need for more space and area, and that being in a very energy intensive area, being that air conditioned, huge amount of processes in terms of emissions, having the knowledge to do sustainable forms of construction, and that not being, although formalized now, forms of construction that we used for centuries before in India, that have been forgotten about with the advent of cement and quick forms of construction. So how to build with low energy requirements and low footprint. I think that's also a very clear takeaway that organizations can have from this session.
Okay, I think great. You've covered it quite well. And, very consciously, when I was naming the, what should I call the workshop, I said, call it the spirit of sustainability. Because you can learn a lot on the practical side, but if you don't catch the spirit of it, you can't implement it in the right manner. And there are no shortcuts when it comes to these implementations. I think if they are done in the right spirit, it is going to achieve long-term benefits for the organizations. So any last piece of advice you have for people who sustainability enthusiasts who will be watching you, and anything you would like to share with them? maybe from your journey at Auroville or just in general.
Absolutely. And thanks for that. So, Punita, as you very nicely mentioned, the spirit of sustainability. It is a mindset. It is an interest. It's not just about doing the bare minimum. It's about being and embodying the idea of sustainability. It's about caring about more than your individual and understanding that the planet has its limitations. I think that's the overall idea that needs to come, and that's the spirit that needs to be embodied. So I very much resonate on what you were saying with the spirit of sustainability. And yeah, in line with that, I think it's the base of sustainability is continuous learning. And if individuals from an organizational perspective or from their own individual perspective can spend the time to learn continuously on the developments in the sustainability space, in what it really means to be sustainable, and also share that information, I think that would be the key piece of advice. I think it's not about the economics of it. It's not about the development space. It's about the learning of it, and it's about the caring of it. And if every individual cares about every other individual and about the planet, that information freely, I think that would very clearly have a long-standing effect on our achieving all our sustainability goals as a country and as a planet.
Great. And I think in India, we somewhere have it in us. What is sustainability? It's just about now bringing it and manifesting in the real sense.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So thanks a lot for your time. I think a lot of people would be keen or will understand Auroville much better through this session. And I hope to see you soon, because I'm looking forward to those sessions and those visits. They look quite exciting and very nurturing sessions, I'm sure, because I've just seen the pictures of Botanical Garden and other places, but I think it's a different world altogether to visit. So looking forward to it. Thank you so much. And
Absolutely.
Thank you, Auroville Consulting, for partnering with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Punita. Thank you, ESG Network. I think this is going to be a great collaboration. I'm looking forward very much to the workshop and to host all of you all in Auroville.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you.